I had a terrible dream last night that we recorded like our best episode ever, and
Yeah.
neither of us recorded it.
No. I hope that's not it.
A fruition.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a homework dream.
Exactly. Honestly. All right, you ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was surprised that you love this movie so much. I can
I
never
love this movie.
like often I can be pretty good about guessing the kind of movies that you like, but this one threw me through a bit of
This
a
is
loop.
one.
I'm
This is one of the
surprised that you
greatest
love this
movies of all
movie.
time. No, this is like one of the greatest movies ever made.
Wow. Well, let's jump into it.
Yeah.
How'd you first find this movie? Like when you originally watched it?
I don't know. I probably watched it like a year or two ago. I think it was just like a movie that it's just one of those movies that I think I people that I follow whose opinions that I respect liked a lot. And I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. James L. Brooks. James L. Brooks, like I probably am more familiar with the fact that like he produced The Simpsons and he still does, I think, which is a
Right.
show that I love a lot. Um, and broadcast news, it's like, it's kind of an interesting like setting, I guess, from my perspective. And I'm like, okay, throw that on. Um, but really, like, I really do think it's like one of the best movies, especially considering its like disposition and its configuration of like this kind of like 80s rom-com film. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if there's anything better than this like it, you know. It's just I just think it just I don't know, it's just really good. And James L. Brooks, I think he's a great writer. He's an amazing writer.
Yeah. I mean, some of the lines in this piece are truly to die for. And just going back to that opening where we sort of meet these three as kids, which I really love,
Yeah.
especially that opening scene with
I think
that
it's a good choice.
first kid, the future news anchor.
Tom.
Great joke, by the way.
Yeah, I love the joke there. Like,
Perfect
what
joke.
kind of joke? Yeah. Future television news anchor. Oh yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah, no, right away the movie is funny.
Oh my God. And even though you only see those kid actors for a couple of moments, all good performances by kid actors, which is very hit or miss when it comes to child actors, because they can sometimes
They're
be
on
great and sometimes be
yeah.
terrible. There's not really a lot in between when it comes to child actors.
They're on screen for like a minute, so
I
maybe
know.
helps.
That's also it too,
Yeah.
right? They have so little screen time that perhaps they don't have enough time to ruin the piece by any means. But all three of them, I think they're all three great little excerpts. The news anchor one, the girl's probably my favorite of the three, where she's writing those pen pal letters,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
and
she's
her
like
guy
very
calls her
serious.
obsessive, and she goes back
Yeah.
in and has that whole long
Yeah.
conversation. Perfect. And then of course the
Yeah.
the future news reporter who graduates high school at 15. That's I love that moment where he's giving his speech and he's
Yeah.
just like,
And he's
fuck
like, I forgive
all
you.
of you.
He's so funny.
Or like when he's getting beaten up and he's like, uh, you know, you might be physically hurting me, but what I'm about to tell you is gonna last with you forever.
You will never make more than $19,000 a
$19,000
year.
a year. It's like 19,000. That's pretty good. Incredible
Yeah,
opening.
and I like the opening too because I think right from the beginning you are set up with each characters, and really that's what the movie is all about. It's about the three characters, Tom, Aaron, and Jane. That's really what the movie is about. Um, and right from the beginning you understand and are well, you're introduced to their anxieties and their preoccupations right from the beginning.
Yeah, it's a really great opening, and it's something that I tell my creative writing students a lot, which is this idea that every character wants something, and there's always something standing in the way. And by presenting this at the beginning of the piece, particularly when they're children, there's never any questions in this piece of what the stakes are in the piece. What is it that these people want? From the very beginning, we know, okay,
Yeah,
here's are the things that these people want in life, and here's how they're going to try to get it, and here's all the
what
things
they're like.
yeah, what they're like, and here's all the things that are going to stand in their way. And then, of course, cut to another amazing
Mhm.
moment where she's on the phone with the news reporter, and then she does that presentation, and that presentation is great because she's trying to,
She's at the conference. She's at the
yeah,
like association conference.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's some like
Jane.
local news reporter thing, and
It's like
she's
a conference. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, some sort of, businessy conference thing, and just the look on their
She's bombing.
faces. Also, great, sound design here, like, you can kinda hear their whispers in the background
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about,
there's a
"Hey, I'm
lot of
gonna go
that.
get
There's a lot of that
lunch."
in this movie. Yeah, yeah,
Very
yeah.
clever, very thoughtful. One of those things that's not sort of a joke that's prevalent, but it's sort of behind the scenes, and when you get it, it's
Yeah, yeah.
really well done.
Yeah.
And there is something a little scarring as a teacher because I see that all the time on my kids' faces,
Mhm.
just that blank, empty expression of "I don't wanna be here." And then they
Well,
just
it's
start
also yeah,
leaving.
yeah. And it's not Jane's like she's not like super great at it, right?
She's
Like
terrible
that's
at
not her
it.
thing. She's not like a public
She's
speaker,
not
right?
an in front of the camera person, and
Yeah.
Next kind of proves that in that moment, is she's
Right.
behind the camera. She's incredible as a producer being behind the camera and doing that stuff, but
She's
when she's the
unbelievable.
one
Yeah.
speaking, no one cares. Like, when she shows that dominoes thing, which also
Yeah,
that's
it was
cool.
dope.
Those little dominoes, those are
Right. And
cool,
everybody agreed.
and everyone
Yeah.
agrees. They
Yeah,
start
you're gonna get a lot
clapping and
more of it.
cheering.
Yeah. Yeah. And her point is like too, and like the point of her speech too is like, and this is something that like once again like is important throughout the movie. Like the point of her like speech, like if you listen to the content of it, is that her thing is that she's worried that television news is sacrificing like content for spectacle, right? Like instead of like doing like work and news that is like actually like matters and is impactful, people are instead like focusing more on like covering or taking things that are have like a level of like fun and spectacle to it that's like fun and flashy and shiny. um and she's very much against that, and of course as we see throughout that is a thing that carries its course throughout like the entire movie with her and Tom and I always forget his name, Aaron. Um, Jane and Tom and Aaron, they have this kind of like all three of them kind of have this back and forth about this subject, among other things.
Yeah, it's one of the core conflicts of this piece, and of course, it's very prevalent to still how news is made today, whether you're thinking
Sure.
more Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whatever, or more traditional broadcast news. And it's this line that you have to play with, which is you have to be entertaining because if you're not entertaining, no one's going to watch your show. And at the end of the day, it's a business, but you also want to produce something that's high quality and is actually telling news.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, how do you balance that and her fear at that moment, which is another great way to sort of express one of the great fears of this piece and sort of the contradiction between what she believes and her attraction to our news anchor himself,
Yes,
because
that's
he's
exactly
the
what it
right,
is.
he's
Yeah.
exactly everything that she supposedly is against.
But she has an unbelievable like crush on him, and it's established right from the beginning of the movie. I love the beginning of the movie, like with the kids, but also with like I love when she cries because you get a
There's a
lot more
lot.
of that throughout the I love putting like a scene of her crying at the very beginning. I feel like in movies like this, I feel like that's kind of like a risk, like to kind of
Mhm.
like right away have her have like a very upsetting moment. And she just cries for no reason. And then throughout the movie, she cries. Like it'll cut
And
from
she'll
like
speak
one scene to
crying.
another and she'll just be crying. She is an amazing actor, by the way. Holly Hunter. Holly
Yeah,
Hunter, Albert
one of the
Brooks,
greats.
and William Hurt, unbelievable acting throughout the whole movie. They're funny and they're complex. Like I really like you don't hate you love everybody, but you love everybody in a way where not that everybody is perfect, but because you want everyone to succeed, but you're also like simultaneously like frustrated with everyone too and their decisions and the way they act and talk to each other, but you also love them all. Like
Mhm.
it really like it's kind of amazing.
It's very conflicting feelings with all these characters because on the one hand, you have this weird sense of wanting to root for them, which I guess is at the core of every good film is wanting to root for your protagonists. But then also these are kind of terrible people. I mean, the decisions that they make time and time again are for quote unquote the news. Of course, there's that great moment just after the speaking scene, or rather just after the scene where he sort of shuts her down and they're in the
Yeah.
news office,
That's a good
and
scene too.
they're talking about their supposed ethics, and they're like,
Yeah,
"Where's
yeah,
the
yeah.
line?" And they're like, "There is no," I mean, basically, there is no line. We will do whatever it takes to get that story. We will tell someone that we love them. We'll do this, we'll do that. And they stand by that. I mean, these are people who which
Does
is
Aaron say that he would? Does Aaron say that he would in that
he
conversation?
does, which is
Okay,
the
yeah.
right, which is the
Right.
irony
Well, it
of
makes sense because he's an asshole, right? Like,
yeah, but like all these characters, and I think that's why Tom is so interesting and in a way is a
I
sort
love
of
Tom.
hero because despite
Yeah.
everyone else, like even though uh we get that big moment at the end where he's exposed for what he is, he's the
Yeah,
only character
yeah.
that's not fundamentally contradictory or hypocritical. I mean, what he says, he
Yeah.
genuinely believes, where
He's a
Aaron and
journalist, yeah.
Jane, I mean, even
Yeah.
though they supposedly have higher ethics, they're they're always right in conflict with their
They do
own.
similar things, right? Like when they
Yeah,
go overseas and they have like the boot like shot, right? Like they he's like they're trying to get a shot of a guy putting on his boot, and I think they stop him for a second,
I
right?
love that
Like so
moment.
they
She's like,
can.
"Wait, wait,
That's a
wait!
great moment.
Only put on that boot if you want to put that on it, but you don't have to. But if you want to,
Yeah.
you don't have to."
But she's like, oh, but but she's like, I really want that fucking shot
Yeah,
of the boot. Like, I really, really want it, And so she's kind of like pressuring him in a way, to do it anyway, But it's like, she can kind of like, sit back and be like, well, I didn't do anything wrong, right? So that's a
yeah,
great, great, great scene. But they're also like the anxiety with Tom too is that like he's handsome,
yeah,
right? And like he's kind of like a Brian Williams type, right? Where
yeah.
I love the character of Tom because yeah, it's like he's like a nice handsome guy, but he's not exactly like super bright, right? That's kind of the character.
For
But
sure.
but I love him, and you, the viewer, are taken in by
He's so
his
charming.
aura. Yeah.
Yeah, such an absolutely charming character, and you can't help but be charmed by him. And you can see in him this
Right. He's not
this
a psychopath.
oh yeah, he definitely has some psychopathic tendencies,
No,
but
I
they
said
all
he's
do.
not. I said he's not.
Oh, he's not
he
psycho. I
he's
mean,
he's not necessary. Like everybody has like he has like as is established in the beginning of the movie, like when he's like when they meet in the bedroom for the first time, he has
yeah,
like anxieties and existential like
exactly.
he
Right.
has
He
interior
has
like
feelings.
thoughts. Yeah.
And one of his big anxieties is this idea of like, am I only here because I look good? Like,
Right.
is the only reason that which is honestly most of the reason that he's
Because he's
put on
dumb.
the air. And he
Yeah.
sort of failed his way upward, right? He talks about that moment
Right.
at the very beginning where he is almost fired as the sports anchor guy, but
Right.
because he's so handsome, everyone writes letters, and now he's continues to fail upward, and that continues throughout
Right.
the film where he just no matter what he does, he kind of moves in the positive direction, which pisses Aaron off. But then you also have to remember that, yeah, and we see this, of course, later on in the movie when Aaron tries to be a news anchor and with the false
Great
sweat and all that.
scene. That is like one of the funniest scenes ever.
Such
By
a
the
hilarious
by the
scene.
way, I will say too with Albert Brooks. Like I love Albert Brooks and I mentioned him many times on the show. This is probably the best introduction to him because Albert Brooks is like the way that Albert Brooks acts like Aaron in this movie is very similar to his other movies. It's very,
Right.
very similar. Like for movies around this area, it's kind of like a shtick that he does, a character. And I
Mhm.
think if you were to watch like one of his movies where he's playing this character throughout a whole movie, it would maybe kind of like be difficult for the average viewer. But I like broadcast news because it kind of introduces you to that Albert Brooks character and that shtick a little bit, where it doesn't, become grating.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they all have their anxieties, but at the end of the day, they all three of them. I mean, even Tom, even though he's not bright, and perhaps part of it is the fact that he is handsome, he is really good at
He's
being
good
a
at
news
act.
anchor, right? We
Yeah,
see
yeah,
that in that
no.
moment where Holly Hunter's
He's
producing
good.
whatever, and
Yeah.
by the way, that I can't even imagine being talked to simultaneously while you're also
Yeah,
trying to read the
but
news
he
and
kills
also
it.
talk to the other.
Yeah.
he fucking kills it. He
He
crushes it.
kills it. One thing that I saw in a letterbox review that like really made me change the way I thought about the movie is that like between the three of them, it's almost like this relationship between a writer, a director, and an actor, right? And that scene too that you're mentioning, that amazing scene where like they're at the party and they're like, we got to go to air with like this whatever story. I love that scene. You know, you have like because you have like Aaron, he's like writing and coming up with things and ideas, and he's feeding it to Jane, who's the producer, the director, and then she is like, using that and feeding it into Tom, who kills it, because not only can he like memorize his lines and read them really well, but he's also really good at improvising.
It is such a hectic moment. And I think they do a really great job of this. It just feels like everything's happening at once. And then, of course, you get those cut scenes back to Aaron. He's sitting at home. He's down in vodka
He's
by
so
the
funny. I
bottle.
love I love him.
I love him too. I mean, he's a real asshole, but they're all
He
kind
is.
of assholes in their own way. So,
Doesn't Tom say to like doesn't he say to him like you're a prick but in the best way or something like
yeah,
that?
yeah. Towards like, I think that's one of the last lines that they have to each other. And
Yeah.
what Aaron's response is like, I think that's the greatest compliment I've ever heard.
Yeah. He's very well aware.
Yeah. But I do love the idea of this sort of director, actor, and writer because that's sort of how they participate in the world. And sort of
Yeah.
also this idea of how the writers sort of buried in the background and they always want more
Yes.
recognition than they're given. And you think of any
Right.
movie, I mean, how many writers can the average
Exactly.
person name versus how many actors can they name? I mean, even though the actor's only
Yeah.
part of it, it's the one that remembers. I mean, everyone when we talk about movie, we talk about oh, the new Jason Statham movie, Beekeeper,
Yeah, yeah, of
right?
course.
We don't talk about the writer of
Who wrote the
Beekeeper.
shit? Yeah. Who wrote Beekeeper? Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, Aaron is he's pissed off about that.
Mhm. I'm amazed by this movie outside of those couple of scenes, how little this movie actually takes place, not necessarily in the newsroom, 'cause much of it takes place in the newsroom, but there's not actually a whole lot of news being done, or rather not like the classic going out and
It's not
journalist
really
kind
a
of
movie
stuff.
about journalism. It's really like
No.
I think that the broadcast news journalism like setting is sort of um it doesn't necessarily matter, right? I think you could take this story and place it in any kind of like work
Yeah.
environment, lawyers, like you could put it into like a hospital or something like that. You know what I mean? I think you could easily do that. It's just James L. Brooks, he worked in television and stuff like that.
Oh,
So I
okay.
think this is just something that he's comfortable with writing from, like with the perspective, the setting. He wasn't a doctor or a lawyer. He worked in television. So there you go.
Yeah.
And but no, yeah, I agree with you. It has less, but I will say that the depiction of when they actually do the news and write and work on that stuff, it does feel very true to life. It doesn't feel
For
too
sure.
it feels pretty grounded.
Yeah, and it seems as if of course our main interest in this piece are our three main characters, our three
Yeah.
protagonists, Tom, Jane, and Aaron. But it's less interested in sort of the investigative end of journalism. You think of something like Spotlight, where it's just about the sort of investigative end. This is all about the presentation of it. And what's not interested is the news itself, but how we present this news and how we
Right.
present the news affects the way we interpret the news. And it's kind of this middleman that people don't really think about because they think about the news itself and they think about their interpretation of the news, but we often forget this sort of middleman that plays a very big part in how we see news. I mean, the difference between watching it on Fox News or MSNBC, right? The way, even if we're given the exact same news, the presentation itself has a large effect on it. And that's sort of Tom's superpower here is he's
Right.
really good at presenting the news. I love that moment where we see that interview he has with that woman for the first time, and they're all sitting in the
Yeah.
newsroom watching it. And that
Are
deer,
you do you mean the date rapes?
yeah, the date rape.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, the date rape piece. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, he like he kind of is all about like emotion and catharsis and less about like information
Hmm.
necessarily, which again, have that Jane, she's like somewhere in the middle, right? Like Jane is kind of like this arbiter where she's
Right.
kind of like, oh, like you crying was like leaving it in there. I wouldn't normally do that, but it's so effective, it moves me, right? And then but then you have the jaded Aaron, he comes in and he's just like, this is just, this is paltry, it's not like it's not about us, it's not about me or you.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because we do see towards the beginning of the film times where he does news interviews, a couple of different pieces that he does,
Yeah.
and he is never on the screen. They never show his face.
Not really. Yeah, he's uninterested. Yeah.
He's completely uninterested in the self, and he thinks that to present good news, the reporter is sort of just this person that's moving the news from one place to another, which is, I guess, the big conflict between Tom and Aaron. Is Aaron's someone who's like, okay, there is news, and my job is just get it from here to there. Where Tom's like, no,
Hmm.
no, we are here to entertain. We are here to present the news in the way that, because if we don't present
Yeah.
the news in this way, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, if
Also,
they look
yeah.
at me and they don't like trust me, or like if I'm not like this, I think that's why a guy like Brian Wilms or whatever is so successful, is because when you see him read or talk about the news on screen or whatever, you can't help, like, it's like, I think a lot of people, they see him and they're just like, ah, yeah, I trust that guy. He's a trustworthy man. Obviously, he didn't even end up being very trustworthy in the long run, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
just the way that he talks, the way that he looks, it's something that I think people, are fair. You have to be comfortable with him.
Hmm.
And if you're not comfortable with the guy who's telling the news, you know, uh, then I guess you just don't really end up caring at all, in it. And so, it's like that balance is hard.
Yeah, and we're certainly at a weird moment now where the presenter is sort of the centerpiece now. I mean, even in broadcast news, it was part of it, but I think we're at a point where the presenter is kind of everything for news. I mean, people
Right.
will trust news merely because they trust that trust,
The
quote
prisoner, yeah.
unquote, the persons that
Hmm.
present it, no matter how like true or untrue that piece is. So
Right. Yeah.
I also didn't know that
Hmm.
Jack Nicholson was in this movie. I was very excited to see the first time I saw him. I'm like, is that he only is in like 5 minutes of this
Yeah.
movie?
He's actually in a lot of James L. Brooks movies. He's in like most of them. He's
Really?
in
Okay.
yeah, he has more yeah, he's a very small part in this movie, but he has more pronounced parts in other movies, like Terms of Endearment. And
Right.
James L. Brooks directed a movie later on in the 90s called As Good as It Gets, that
Mhm.
that has like a starring role of Jack
Okay.
Nicholson in it. So yeah, he's in it a lot. And he's in it, not very, he's not in it a lot in
Right.
broadcast news.
Yeah.
But yeah. Mhm.
Those are great moments when you get to see him though, like
Yeah,
when he's
yeah.
presenting the news,
They
great
they
news
they
reporter.
want his approval badly. He's like the
Oh yeah.
father figure.
I love that moment late in the film, towards the end, where they realize that they have to fire a bunch of people because they have to cut like $24
Right, the
million
layoffs,
dollars
yeah.
because broadcast news isn't making the kind of money it should be. The beginning of the decline of
Right,
broadcast
is
news.
declining.
And Jack Nicholson is in the office. And this is the only real scene with Jack Nicholson in it.
Yeah.
And he's coming to support the troops, saying
He's
hi to people, and then they know like the only reason he would be there is if shit's about to go
yeah, if
down.
something's wrong.
And the head of the network, which I also think is a great dynamic because we see this in the real world, how even though Jack Nicholson is just a news reporter, a news anchorman, and
Yeah.
the guy he's with is the man who owns the whole thing, right? He's the CEO. He's still at the whim of the news anchor. I mean, even though like the news anchor doesn't own the thing.
He's like the head honcho, you
Right.
know? Because I think, like, yeah, when you have that much like power over people, I think other people want to like obtain it, right? And so you
Mhm.
don't want to lose him to other
Yeah.
networks, right? Because there's competition.
Yeah. And there's that great line.
He's like, you cut your salary by $1
by
million.
like a million, and this would help a lot. And he just looks at him. He doesn't even say anything. He just looks at
Yeah.
him.
He doesn't say anything. And
Great
he's like,
Jack
I'm
Nicholson
kidding.
moment.
Oh, yeah. I love that scene too. Yeah. Yeah. It sucks. Yeah. Yeah, when they all get laid off and stuff. Um, and yeah, I do kind of like the other like the characters that are on the kind of like the edges. Joan Cusack in this movie is really good. Like the beginning scene when
Yes.
she's running to get the tape.
Yeah.
Oh, what a she's so funny in this movie. She is a she's to me she's like an all-star supporting actor for
Hmm.
me. Like whenever you see her in a movie, you're just like, yes, she's so good, you know. But she's never in any starring roles really.
Poor Joan Cusack. Yeah, but even though she's sort of a side character, and all of our side characters, as you were saying, I mean, I love the film editor. He only has like 6 lines, but he's really
He's
great.
great. He looks like Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one that thought that. Like the first time, I'm
I
like,
was like, is that Phil? No, it's not. No,
it can't be. I'm like, that can't be Philip Seymour
no,
Hoffman,
it's
but he
not.
looked just
But he
like
looks
him.
and sounds like him. Yeah, it's weird.
It's so weird how similar he looks. And the older gentleman, I can't remember what his job is. He's like a manager of some kind of chubby guy. I don't know. I also don't know his name in the movie or
Is
that
it the
kind of
guy
thing.
who's in Gremlins 2?
Yes, that guy.
Yeah, that guy's great too. I like him a lot.
Just a lot of little things that don't necessarily need to matter, but because they're there, they just make the movie all that much better. I mean, just having those side characters that have their own wants and desires and needs. And I remember reading an interview with Nora Ephron. This was a couple years ago that I read this interview.
Mhm.
And she talks about this idea how something that was very important to her, and Nora Ephron is sort of famous for like being very meticulous about the way she makes her films, is this idea that every single character has to have a motivation. Even if you only see them for 7 seconds, there's something that they want. They're real human beings. And you definitely see that with this piece, no matter how much or little of the film that they're in, because like when those firings happen, even characters you only meet for like 10 seconds, they feel
Yeah.
sad. Like it feels like a genuinely intense moment
Mhm.
because they just feel like real people. They feel like real humans, even if you only meet them for 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. I again, I have to go back to the acting again, like here with everyone involved, especially the three leads. Like they just, this is a movie that definitely isn't necessarily it's a rom-com. So and all rom-coms don't necessarily do anything particularly mind-blowing in terms of like directing and things like that. Not that like it necessarily needs to be that way though. I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay because at the end of the day, at the forefront of the film is the acting and the writing. And those are the best parts of the movie and they're amazing. They're like to me they're god tier levels of like acting and writing here.
I almost think if we had a more flashy direction style here, which I was watching Maestro the other day after you suggested that I watch it, and I think that's one of the big problems with that piece is sort of the direction takes over and we
It's
lose the
crazy.
story in
Yeah,
itself.
we do. Yeah, we do. Yeah. He's like that movie's funny too because it's like Bradley Cooper's like an actor, right? And so you're
Mhm.
just like, oh, he's like an actor director, but like the acting kind of takes a back seat a little bit, like the performance do, I think.
Yeah. Which is so strange and very different from A Star is Born. But in this piece, flashy direction, I don't think would work. I don't think if you had someone who is this big, flashy director and these, giant moving scenes, because so
Yeah.
much weight is put on the story and the writing, and particularly our performances here, we kind of just need the room to just be in these places and have these more simple shots because we just can't be complicated by that because it's not
Yeah.
important to the story, and I think if anything, it would take away from it, especially
Yeah. 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 I will say that the scene where they again, going back to the scene where they are like they have to leave the party to go do the news story at the
yeah.
station, like that is I was watching it a second time, seeing that scene again. I was struck by how well directed that whole sequence is, the way it's edited and film, like just everything about that scene. I think is perfectly directed, and it's a little flashy. I mean, I wouldn't say it's super flashy, but it's like you have that one where it's like they have like the camera in front of Tom, and then they kind of like move around him, and
Yeah.
then you see her up at the window, like Jane at the window of her, like talking and looking down at Tom. Amazing, like just so good.
And there's this real skill here of m- moments where there's a lot of people in the scene and they all feel like they're doing something. It doesn't feel like one of those movies where there's just
You're standing
extras in the
around.
background just to be extras, even though, of course,
Yeah,
that's mostly what
there
they're
are.
there to be. It always feels energetic and like all of these people are doing something. They never just feel
Yeah.
like people standing around waiting to be in front of a camera, which I think is a very hard thing to do well, especially in a film like this where so much of
Yeah.
the film, I mean, these three characters are almost never by themselves. They're almost always
Yeah.
surrounded by other people. And when you're in the offices, it feels like a real office because there's people
Yeah.
like doing office shit. It's truly incredible.
I like the scene when Tom is teaching uh Aaron how to like be a good news anchor. I love that scene because it's like him like it's like because like Tom throughout the movie is like he looks up he pretty much he I would say he looks up to Jane and Arth and
Yeah,
Aaron, like
I would
he
say so.
likes him. He's aware that they're smarter than him in some way. But I just love this scene because he's trying to teach Aaron something that he is good at, right? And so there's like this new kind of change in dynamic where he's like kind of like nitpicking him and saying like, oh, you use this, do this trick, da 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 da. And I love that scene. I love how that scene ends as well. If you
Yeah.
feel yourself reading, stop and start selling a little.
And you can see even when Aaron's taking in it the information, he's sort of doing it begrudgingly because he
Yeah,
genuinely sees himself
he
as
doesn't want to do it.
better than Tom because he is
Yeah.
smarter. He thinks that that makes him better in every way. And I think that's what's so fascinating about the dynamic between Tom and Aaron because Tom has this almost puppy dog love for
Yeah.
not only Jane but also in a certain sense Aaron, and he's
Hmm.
very much admires him through almost the whole
Right.
piece. And yet Aaron just fucking hates Tom from like the very first
For the
moment.
most part, yeah, yeah, he does. Yeah. Because he says he's the devil. He thinks he's
he,
the devil.
he's the devil.
Yeah.
Poor Tom. But Jane loves who she loves. She can't not love him. There's just something about him that is so charming and
And she just cannot love, right, like she loves Tom even though there are certain things about him that she hates. And even though um Aaron is kind of like the person that she like, maybe Aaron is more like her.
Mhm.
She cannot she just simply just doesn't love him more than, as a friend, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah,
it's and
I love that dynamic between the
yeah.
two, between Aaron and Jane, because Aaron's deeply in love with Jane and he makes
Yeah.
many hints about it
He says it
throughout the
many
film.
times.
He says it so many times. And they're
And she's
so
like, "Oh,
close,
like
right? Their relationship is so close. And yet to her,
yeah.
she just sees him, I mean, as a very close friend, as their best friend, but it's strictly platonic. Like there's no
Yeah.
reason beyond she just doesn't
She
feel that way. There's no
she just doesn't, yeah.
logic to it. It's not that, oh, they just wouldn't
Yeah.
work together, this or that or the other, which is I think is great because I think a lesser filmmaker would try to give some sort of explanation why, oh, here's the
Yeah.
logical reason why they can't be together or their love wouldn't work. Or I
Mhm.
mean, so many other filmmakers, she would end up with Aaron, which I think would be a
Right.
cowardly move. And I'm glad they
It
don't do
would be,
that
yeah.
here. But even though there's a million reasons in the world why Aaron and Jane should be together, and they are so close. I mean, their
Mhm.
relationship is almost a married couple esque. I mean, they you remember that moment where they are in whatever war torn country, and
Yeah.
they're like inches from each other's face, right? And you can see like
Yeah.
Aaron's like kind of leaning in for a kiss.
Yeah, he's like, he's like, yeah, that's a good scene because he's like, this could be our last moment. He doesn't say it, but you feel it. It's
Yeah.
almost this feeling of like this could be our last moment together. Like maybe we should kiss. But she doesn't give in.
She never gives it. She just
She
doesn't
doesn't even
feel
like
that
think
way.
about it. Yeah,
No, it doesn't even cross her mind. I mean,
yeah.
when he tells her that he loves her towards the end, like when he's telling her that Tom's the devil, and that another amazing scene, by the way, great
What a great
performances.
scene. That is one of the craziest scenes when he like gets really angry at her.
Oh my
It's like,
gosh.
oh, like it kind of jolts you. You're like, oh wow, like,
And she's so
jeez.
surprised. She's like
Yeah.
baffled by it. It's like,
But she immediately changes his mind because he likes her that much, right? Like he
yeah,
immediately is like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I yelled at you." Da, da, da. You know?
it's an amazing moment, and an amazing performance where he's able to go from this. And this is how people act in real life. They
Yeah, they
are
do.
contradiction. Humans are fundamentally contradictory creatures, and we want to be loved, even if that means we sort of have to sell our soul in a certain sense. And even though he hates Tom, he begrudgingly comes to respect him in this way because
Yeah. And again, as much as Aaron, it's like, and two, like his decision, right, to tell Jane about the crying tape, right? Like that decision is also a very loaded kind of thing because it's
oh yeah,
like because Aaron is like jealous of the fact that like he can't ever it's like almost an act of jealousy, right?
hmm
Like an act of
for
like,
sure,
but you could also look at it as an act of a friend who's looking out for their friend, right?
right.
And so, like, no one in the movie, I think, is evil or necessarily good or whatever those two words mean. Everyone is trying to do their best that they can. And I think that accounts for everyone. And that's why I think pretty much anyone who sees this movie can at least see something in at least one or nearly all three main characters.
Mm. Yeah, it feels as if there's a little bit of ourselves in all of these. And I think part of the reason these three characters work is because they are so human. They are contradictory, and they have this sort of cognitive dissonance where they have two opposing ideas. And I think this is a very hard thing for writers to do when they tell a story, whether it is in film or television or a short story or novel or whatever, and to sort of expose the fact that we as humans, we hold these two opposite beliefs simultaneously, and that's not inhuman. That's just at the core of what we
Yeah.
are as human. We have these beliefs. And then at that moment, when she goes to the airport and she confronts Tom about it, like Tom
Yeah.
is completely like he doesn't understand. He doesn't get
He doesn't give a
what's wrong
fuck.
about and honestly,
Yeah.
I think I'm with Tom at the end of the day. Like I
No, I
don't
mean, like, yeah,
care.
yeah. No, I mean, like, I'm not with anyone in particular, right?
Yeah.
I just think that, like, I understand everybody's response for the most part,
hmm
right? She's upset because she feels like she's seeing Tom for who he is,
hmm
and that's upsetting to her. And Tom is like, I was just doing my job, right? Like, this is like kind of part of the whole shtick,
Yeah.
the thing that we
And
do.
he never like hid it. And I think that's the thing.
Yeah, he didn't hide it. That's it. Yeah, he wasn't like it wasn't. That's a good point. He doesn't.
That's that's what makes Tom such an endearing character. Is he
Yeah.
is a person who, even though he does these disingenuous acts, in a way he's the most genuine because he's completely open about who he is. He never
He's not
pretends to
pretending, yeah.
be something that he's not, and it's actually
And he
Jane
says that
herself.
too.
Yeah,
He says that too.
right?
I never want doesn't he say to Aaron something along the lines of like I never want to pretend that I'm more smart than I
Yeah,
am. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. At that moment when they're at some party of some kind.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating because it's really Jane who has put on this persona on Tom of
Mhm.
who he is, right? She's created this persona
Exactly.
of who this person is, and it's not really Tom's fault. I mean, Tom has always been who
Yeah,
he
he didn't
was,
do
and
anything wrong.
he didn't pretend. I mean, he didn't lie about it. He didn't openly say like we went and shot this later, but he never lied
Yeah.
about it. He was never asked about it. I'm sure if he was asked about it, he'd be like, "Yeah, we went and shot this later." He's always genuine to
He didn't
himself.
erase it. Yeah, he didn't do anything like
No,
that.
right? He could have easily destroyed the evidence, but he didn't see what he was doing as wrong. And I love
Yeah.
watching that moment, like actually watching the scene where he's crying because everyone on set, including the woman who was date raped, are like, "Oh, that's really cool. Like, that's an interesting, like, technique that you did." Like, no one sees it as wrong
Yeah.
except Jane because she sees it as disingenuous. Sees it as
Right.
some sort of line that he's
Mhm.
crossed.
Mhm. Yeah. And yeah, that scene at the airport is so good because yeah, it's just like and again, Tom just doesn't even like he doesn't even know what to say about it. Like I was like paying attention to what he was saying in that conversation. He doesn't say anything about like the tape or the crying
No.
or anything like that. He's just like, who gives a fuck? Let's just go on the plane because before this, they're like we should go on vacation
Because she's
because like
never
Jane
taken a vacation.
yeah, Jane got a promotion and they're like we should go on a vacation for a week somewhere. Who cares? And they're like, okay. And she's like, yeah, let's go. So we can get to know each other outside of work, pretty much.
Mhm.
And it's also kind of like a cop out too, right? Like Jane is like a control freak, right?
Yeah.
And so she doesn't want to like I think it's kind of maybe also serves as kind of like an excuse to not go on the trip, right? In a way. Um Not that she doesn't believe what she's saying, I think she does. And but again, Tom in that moment, like I was paying attention to him, it's like he doesn't really like he doesn't really he doesn't really he deflects completely from the tape thing because he just doesn't he doesn't get it. Like he's
He's
just like, look, we were going on this trip. This is what's important. We should do that. And she's just like, no, you don't get it. Like I can't do it because of what you did that I feel is wrong. And it's just like everybody's like everybody has their own unique brain, like
yeah.
they all they have their own like set of moral codes and levels of intelligence and all this stuff and that's kind of where I guess the conflict arises between people in romantic relationships, friendships, work relationships, it's just that's just how it is.
Yeah, it also exposes something interesting about Tom, which I think differentiates him from Jane and Aaron, where Jane and Aaron, the newsroom is their life. I mean, that's how they define themselves. If
Yeah.
someone said, "Who are you? What do you do?" Like that's how they define themselves. Where Tom, although he loves his job a lot, at the end of the day, he sees it as a job. Like it's
He
just
fell
something
into
that
it.
you do.
Yeah.
Right? He fell into it. It's not
He's just
something
like, I guess I'm good at it.
he's not or necessarily passionate about. It's
He
just
doesn't have an
his nine to
allegiance to
five.
like this. Yeah, he doesn't have
No.
like an allegiance to like a journalism ethics or anything like that.
He just happens to be really good at it. And it's not
Yeah.
that he doesn't practice. I mean, you can see he has the skills. It's not just talent. It's not just like he walks
He's like
in.
a tool set.
Yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's just like, "Oh, I'm going to London now. I am just gonna go do this and I'm gonna do that." And he's just on this path, and it's
Mhm,
not about news integrity or the importance of journalism. He's just like, "I'm just
mhm.
here. I'm just putting in the work."
Right. Right. And yeah, and then again, yeah, again you have like Jane and you have like Aaron and they're the opposite in that like they had to work really, really hard. Right. And like Jane, you see her literally you do see her work really hard. You see her like push herself to these like
Wow.
extremes, and again, love it. Love the acting. Just, I can't once again, I cannot it pushes her to the extreme where she's like crying, right? And like
Mhm.
even when she's like sitting and crying by herself and you have no idea like what exactly she's crying about, like you get it. Like, I feel you, like
Yeah.
I completely understand given the all these constraints that we've seen so far, why you would just be crying and sitting there alone. It sucks. So, it's just um yeah. Um mhm,
Yeah, and that's what I love so much about those crying scenes is it doesn't really matter why she's crying. I mean, why she's crying is secondary to the act in and of itself, and it just
mhm,
exposes the sort of deep, dark exhaustion and frustration with the world,
mhm.
and not giving her a reason to cry. Weirdly enough, makes it all the more emotional. And
It's funny too.
yeah, it's
It's
also
funny. When it
like
cuts to her
because
crying, it's
when it
funny.
cuts to her, like it is funny, and it's so you have like these emotions coming on you kind of simultaneously. Where on one end you kind of want to laugh, but you're also laughing because like it's awkward. I mean, it's one of those situations
Yeah,
where I mean, imagine it's almost like walking up to a stranger and they're crying, and like you feel bad for them, but then
it goes
also
bad. Like
you're uncomfortable with it,
you
and
also kind of wonder like what's wrong, like
Mhm.
you kind of like think to yourself.
Yeah. How do you feel about the ending?
I think the ending is fine. It's maybe not the strongest part of the movie, but I think it's overall pretty good.
Mm.
Like the epilogue is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the epilogue, yeah. I think it's good. I think it kind of like um um it kind of it's kind of this again simultaneous thing of like everybody is kind of like um I think for me the strongest part of the ending is like kind of like this feeling that of like the what if feeling, right? Because everybody is
Mhm.
doing really well,
Yeah.
right? And part of me kind of wishes that maybe some of them didn't. Maybe there's like this isn't going well or da da da. But everybody's doing perfectly well. It's a very positive ending in which everyone is fine. But I will say there is kind of like this tinge of like sadness
Hmm.
or this tinge of like that kind of like what if kind of thing.
Right.
Like, what if I did this? What if we did that? What if we became a thing? So I do like that feeling. It's never discussed or talked about or anything like that. But I do kind of like that kind of like little bit um to kind of like round out the movie a little bit. Even if on paper I think the movie ends on a weirdly overtly positive note.
Mm.
Somewhat.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely that feeling of what if the three of us stayed in the same place? What kind of world would be created? What would have happened? And all of
Yeah,
this.
because they're so
But
good together.
part of me really wishes that moment where she's in the car right after the airport scene
Yeah, just ended there. Yeah.
just cut to black right there.
I love that scene too, where she's just like, cause like before she's in the taxi cab and she's telling the guy how to do it, and then she does it at the end at the airport, and she doesn't, and she's just like, you know what, do whatever you want, and then
But then
like a
she
minute
jumps in
later,
anyways,
yeah, yeah,
right?
she jumps in anyway to give one, cause she's like she's a
She
director,
can't,
she's a
she has to.
producer,
She can't.
she can't help
Yeah.
herself at all. Yeah, and I do like too that they don't actually all get together. Like no
Mhm.
one, they
Yeah.
like the three of them at the
Agree.
end. I do like that they, no one in this
No one wins.
love triangle, no one wins in terms of like who gets together with who.
Yeah. It's not that I don't like the ending. I think the ending's fine, but it just leaves me for a film that is so high quality. I think it's the weakest part of the film, and I think the film would be stronger without it. Personally, I mean, you stop right there, right when she's leaving that car. That just expresses like everyone where they are, and then it also gives this sort of idea of, and maybe this is just me wanting not to know what happens to them, just like the
Yeah, yeah,
ambiguity
yeah,
of them leaving them at this moment, and it's not 7 years in the future or however long in the future. It's just they're there, and then we never know what happens. Instead of, oh, it's however many years later, and now he's the head
yeah.
news anchor, and
They
you
have like
know
kids and
Aaron
boyfriends
has
and
the
wives and
kids and all that, and it's fine. I get it. I get why they do it, right? That's a very classic, especially in the '80s movie thing, and but I don't know. But still great. I mean,
no, it's
I
still
mean,
like good. Like it's
it's a
still,
tiny
and
complaint,
and it's
right?
also very, it's like the last 10 minutes of the movie. If you didn't want to watch it, you could just like
Just turn it off.
when she's in the car, you could just, yeah, turn it off. So I think it's okay. It is,
Yeah.
again, it's like barely a complaint. It's just kind of like, it's just not nearly as like strong as the rest of the movie. I do like when they're talking, when Aaron and Tom are talking with each other and they're kind of chiding each other a little bit. Like that's a good interaction. Like that's kind of fun. Like he has the kid like call him a name and like, oh, that's fun. And you know,
Yeah. It's a great line. All right. Should we wrap things up?
yeah, I think that's a good stopping point. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, I will say I was very surprised how much you love this movie. Not that I don't love this movie. I love this movie very much, but it feels to me that it's not up your usual sort of film suggestions. So I'm glad we got to watch something a little outside of,
A little light. A little
yeah,
light.
a little light for you. It's not like dark or twisted or anything like that, which is nice. I feel like we
Yeah,
needed
I
something
agree.
that, especially after watching movies like Mandavi, great
Yeah,
film,
yeah,
but
it's a tough.
it's such
It's kind
a
of it's
tough
a hellish film. Yeah.
experience. So being something a little more light, a little more fun is always incredible. And of course, the core of this is really the writing and the performances. I mean, everyone here just knocks it out of the park completely. Nothing too exciting to say about the direction or lighting or editing, although it's competent, of course,
It's
and
extremely so, yeah.
it's good, but I don't think there's anything really to be said about it beyond it just highlights how great these performances are and how great the writing is. And I had a really good time, which I feel like it's been a minute where I've just seen a movie and I was just there and I just had fun. I don't know why. It's just like these last couple of movies I've been going to, they've just felt like a drag
Mm.
and it's taking forever to get through them. But this, I mean, I never looked at my watch, I never looked at a
Yeah.
clock. I just fell into the movie and just had a really good time. So I'm going to give this an extremely strong and almost 9, but extremely
Mhm.
strong 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna give it a very, like, high 9 out of 10. Again, just 3 actors at the top of their game, they're unbelievable. You love them, you hate well, I wouldn't say even you hate them. You love them, but you're also frustrated by them, you
Yeah.
know? They're your guys, like, you want them to, you want them to have what they want, but everybody can't have what they want at the same time. It's not possible. And so seeing their interactions with each other when they're all 3 together and the different, couples, um, just those that dialogue and those interactions are just so much fun to watch. They just really, really kill it. And it's a very funny movie too. It really is. Like I think everything about the comedy has aged really well.
Yeah.
And again, I think anyone can watch this movie and see something within themselves in some kind of way. So yeah, I really, really, really like broadcast news. It's just I don't know, just and again, yeah, it is a movie that I don't necessarily gravitate to.
Mhm.
Kind of like I'm not a fan of Nora Ephron movies or anything like that for the
Right.
most part. I just don't really care much for that kind of schmaltzy kind of stuff. But I don't know, broadcast news to me,
I'm
it's
glad
just
you love it.
there's something about it that just is way more interesting for some reason. It's just a little bit more complex, I think, in my opinion.
Mhm.
That's just me. But I love it.
Mm. All right. Well, you can find everything I do at Austin Lugo.
I'm on Letterbox at Retro Andrew, RATR0 Andrew.
And you can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and most importantly, YouTube at With Nothing to Say. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks.